I'm going to talk about things in the Third Reich, the justice system, the pseudo justice system, and as always, if you've got any questions, then to write them up. Once more, I shall tell you, this is a chat. This is me talking largely off the top of my head, and because there was the complaint made by Michael, which I think is totally justified, that my delivery is not very good, but unfortunately it's the only delivery I've got, so it's the one that there is. Now the thing is, when I talk off the top of my head, I don't have to prepare it. But if I start preparing things, unfortunately, I can't do my normal job. And so there. So if you don't like it, unfortunately, I'm sorry, nothing really I can do about it. Now, the argument, of course, could be said that if I actually prepared things properly, I'd get more viewers, and then that would generate more income. Well, yes, that may be true, but then again, I possibly lose my day job as a result. So anyway, that's that. So today, once more, I'm going to talk about the justice system. And before going any further, just to make some points about justice in general, because I think often the point of justice is either to for society to get some sort of retribution for things which have been done to it, or that's number one, or number two, it's to act as a deterrent to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And in the case of, for example, in the case of Nazi Germany, I think here they didn't have the ideas particularly clear in their heads, as I don't think they have actually in many places in the world. The death penalty was very common in Nazi Germany, from being in a state in Germany in the 1920s where it came close to being abolished. By within 10 years, there were lots of offences for which one could be sentenced to death. And there's also something very important about this, because there's two types of killings which took place. You have the Holocaust, which had the highest security classification that existed, the RS, Reich Security Matter, something like that translated, and which was secret. I mean, everybody knew about it, or just about everybody knew about it who had been in Poland, but at home it was secret. And indeed, the people who involved had to sign a declaration, which was by Ernst Lurk, said they presented to them that they would not actually betray any of the secrets that they actually learned on the pain of death. But on the other hand, other posters were put up to say that we've executed these people have been executed, and for these reasons. Indeed, this wasn't a Nazi thing. This happened beforehand. So when, for example, if you got killers like Peter Kürten, who was executed, he was the Dusseldorf vampire. So there were posters put up to say that he had been executed. So therefore, that supposedly was to act as a deterrent. So what the Nazis, though, wanted to do, this was directed at the killing of political opponents. Now, it started off, the very first execution, which happened in May of 1933, that was of somebody who had committed murder. I talked about him a while ago. And so he was executed for killing someone else. Might have been accidental. He maybe didn't mean to kill him, but he did kill him during a robbery, and so therefore he was executed for that. But I don't think the Nazis, like indeed the communists, or even Putin's Russia today, were really too bothered about executing people, criminals. They were more interested in the political oppression. What happened in Poland, for example, a friend of mine who was in prison for a couple of years, he said that when for taking part in demonstrations against the regime in 1976, he said when they put them in prison, they were in with common criminals. So it was the idea that they thought that the criminals would then pick on the politicals. That was what. And indeed, also I know somebody or met somebody who was imprisoned for being against the Soviet Union. So when he was imprisoned in the 70s or beginning of the 80s, he also was found, but they put them in with the criminals were there really to terrorize the political prisoners. Um, in Germany in 1926, there was somebody called Josef Jakubowski. He was executed for a crime he probably didn't commit. He was a farm laborer. He was from Poland. He'd been living there for about 10, 12 years, and he was accused of having committed a murder, although the evidence is, obviously I don't know if he's guilty or not guilty, but the evidence certainly points towards his innocence. So he was probably innocent, and this was brought out in the press, and this led to moves to actually abolish the death sentencing. And I think if it hadn't been for Peter Korten, the Dusseldorf vampire, then it possibly would have actually got to that. Now, the Nazis came to power, and they made the most of the fact that they had reintroduced the death penalty, and it was to make life safe for the average citizen. That's what they said. As though, this is a fundamental part of their policy. Now, I'm actually quite unusual in this, because everybody's either really for or really against the death penalty, and except for me, I'm quite neutral on it actually. I'm sometimes I'm for and sometimes I'm against it, but there are some very good arguments against it. One being, of course, that you might get that a person might actually be innocent. Well, actually, to a certain extent, I reject that argument, because one case of somebody who was in the United States, so he said if he hadn't got the death penalty, he wouldn't have all these investigations afterwards, and he wouldn't have turned out that later he was innocent. Of course, there have been cases, even there's one famous case, I think, from 1994, where the person was possibly or probably innocent who was executed. That being one, but there's another argument, which is that if you've got a jury trial, and if there is an element of doubt of whatever it is, then a jury might choose to acquit somebody, even though they're pretty certain he's guilty, but there's just that nagging doubt in the mind, and because of this, they might actually let them off. But so there are the two. I think in the United States, I don't think it's personally, I don't think it's all that clear what the idea is. If it's a point in the United States, it costs 3 times more money to execute someone as to leave them in prison. So if they have one argument against it. I once picked up 2 people. Didn't pick them up, sorry, that's not quite true. They were staying in the same hotel as I was in Germany, but it was a couple. He was the warden of a prison in the United States, I won't say which one, and his wife was also, she was quite high up in the prison system, but in a different prison. And they both said the same thing, that they were in favor of capital punishment. But the thing was, in the United States, is that because the time it took to execute somebody, that they didn't, that the criminals couldn't see the link between committing the crime and getting the punishment. So anyway, there's 1 or 2 arguments without me coming to any conclusions. As far as the Nazis were concerned, in Nazi Germany, crime statistics show a drop in crime from 1932, but there could be 2 reasons. One, the statistics could be fiddled anyway to show what the Nazis wanted, and that I don't know if they are or they aren't. And the next thing is, there was the poverty that existed because of the depression, but the country started to come out of the recession in the middle of 1932, and also you've got the official use of violence. That is to say, if you were some thug, you could join the SA and then you could go beating up people, Jews or whoever it was, communists, and that was no longer something for which you could get punished for. So If you added that crime into the crime statistics, I don't know, but I'm pretty certain the crime actually increased in Nazi Germany. That in the 30s. I'm just giving that again. I don't absolutely know, and I'll come to the questions. I see there's one or two interesting things, but I'll come to that. I'll come to that at the end. Now. As far as the political opponents were concerned, investigations into them was in the hands of the Gestapo or the political police, which became the Gestapo. Remember that the Gestapo existed only in Prussia until 1936, but there was political police in all the other states of Germany. And so the potential opposition figures could be followed abroad, maybe not as effectively as Russia does today, for example, but it could happen. Or even the Communist Party. In London, there was the murder of a dissident in the Markov, Sergei Markov, allegedly killed with a poisoned umbrella in London, for example, in around 1980 or thereabouts. I can't remember exactly when it happened. So these things did happen. There were attempted assassinations in Czechoslovakia, because many Germans actually fled to Czechoslovakia. After that, the Gestapo, after the occupation of Czechoslovakia and after France and other places, they did actively seek out German dissidents who had fled earlier and possibly couldn't flee any further. Now, once a person had been arrested, might have been interrogated by the Gestapo, and then it could be the Gestapo that made a decision what to do with the person. If guilt of future opposition was likely, then the person could be sent to a concentration camp, and that was completely outside the judicial system. But that was in the hands of the Gestapo head himself. He could actually decide as he saw fit. Bear in mind also, in some cases, the Gestapo was an organization which was rotated around. So you could have the police, formerly in the criminal police, and then they could go to the Gestapo. And so these could be people who have formerly been in the criminal police. I mean, you've got Arthur Niebuhr, for example, or Christian Wirth. These were people who had been ended up being major criminals, but had been part of the criminal police beforehand, and they'd been investigating genuine crime. If we take the case of the Scholl siblings, for example, you've got the person who interrogated them, who he's in the film, the German film, he's portrayed as being quite a decent person. And certainly, I mean, there was contact between the father of the Scholl siblings and him after the war, that they wrote to each other. Even the father of Sophie Scholl got the Gestapo person a job via a friend of his. So he didn't have the decision, wasn't his, but he was probably one of these more normal career persons. He handed the case, obviously the case went to his boss, Oswald Schäfer, who was an hardened Nazi, who then handed the Scholl siblings over to the People's Court. Maybe even Schäfer didn't have much of a decision in this, because it was so well known that Freisler was sent down from Berlin to Munich on a Sunday, ruining his Sunday, so he could be at the People's Court on the Sunday to actually sentence the Scholls and the third person, Christoph Probst, to death. So there was a public prosecutor's office as such, and they had to decide what to do about political offences that had been referred to it by the Gestapo. So a political offence could be something like just being a member of a resistance organisation, or just distributing leaflets, as Sophie Scholl did, for example, or even just listening to foreign radio broadcasts. And there are cases where people were sentenced to death for listening to foreign radio broadcasts. And you have to ask yourself, what was the point of that? I mean, where's the sense in that? Because they can't make this public. One of the problems with the People's Court was this, is that there were things such as the Holocaust, which if people said this in the court, then suddenly the People's Court, which was there to be a show trial, to make fun of people, to make them to put them on display, then suddenly they can't put this on display because they're talking about things that the Nazi state doesn't want to be broadcast. That's why, for example, when you've got the film, The Traitors Before the People's Court, that was meant to go on to newsreels and things like that, but it didn't. It couldn't, because they talked about things like this openly. The idea of a People's Court, though, doesn't even come from the Nazis. This is, unfortunately, there were many things that existed beforehand, and the idea came from even in the 20s. But for example, in 1932, you've got the Altona disturbances, which happened in Hamburg, where you've got communists and Nazis fighting amongst themselves and the police, and there were 4 people put on trial by the People's Court there. They were found innocent, but then the Nazis got a hold of them later and found them guilty, and then had them executed. The thing about the People's Court, though, the Nazi Special People's Court, was founded in July of 1934. And surprisingly enough, it was due to be set up at the same time as the so-called Röhm-Putsch and the Night of the Long Knives. But because of the Night of the Long Knives, it had to be put back, the starting of it, by a week. The People's Court, as such, as what Freisler's noted for, and convicted a total of 15,519 people in 7,022 proceedings, of which 5,279 people were convicted. Were sentenced to death. So the chances are you've got a 2/3 chance of being sentenced to death, and a roughly 1/3 chance. Sorry, if you're found guilty, I'll do it again. Start again. You've got a sorry, you've got a 1/3 chance of getting a death sentence if you're in front of the People's Court. Approximately half of those that came in front of the People's Court were from members of from people from other countries, and 95% of the death sentences were after 1942. So I think that the jump in the number of death sentences was not just a consequence of the increasing barbarization of society during wartime. So you got the bombing of the cities, which started in 1940, but was getting worse and worse as from the second half of 1942. But also after the defeat at Stalingrad and 42-43, that was clear that the war at very best was going to be drawn. So I think that the sign of the number of death sentences is due to this desperation. But there is something what John Keegan called anticipating the wishes of the Fuhrer, which I think exists today in Russia, and exactly the same, anticipating the wishes of Putin. That is the reason for the death sentences in Nazi Germany, because the judges, wanting to further their own careers, then give death sentences because they think that that is what Hitler would want. But indeed, Hitler had said that that's what he wanted. On the 26th of April 1942, he made a speech. This was his first speech since the 11th of December 1941. He'd gone there on that day to declare war on the United States. Then he hung around in Berlin until the following day, where he told his mates all about the Holocaust on the 12th of December 1941. After that, we've got the defeats of the winter of 1941. We've got the death camps. Well, of course, the normal public didn't know about that, but we've got death camps at Beaujetz and Sobibor are now in operation, and Hemel and Abnerem. And Hitler, in this speech, he openly stated that only National Socialism was capable of dealing with the racial question. And in saying this, I would suggest to you that these judges knew how to interpret that. I think that they mightn't have known exactly, but it was pretty obvious that something unpleasant was happening to the Jewish population. I've got I'm going to translate to you here his speech here, a part of it anyway. So I've got it here somewhere. Where was that one? I expect that German jurisprudence understands that the nation is not there for them, but they are there for the nation. Germany has to live, irrespective of the formal interpretation of justice. So I think that is that sentence makes it quite clear. Give you an example. There was a criminal. He got married in 1937 and he mistreated his wife. So much so that she became mentally deranged and died as a result of what he did to her. He got 5 years imprisonment at a moment when 10,000 German soldiers, according to Hitler, I'm quoting Hitler, at a moment when 10,000 brave German men have to die in order to save the homeland from Bolshevism. That means to protect their wives and children. I will take a hand, said Hitler, in these cases from now on and direct the orders to the judges that they have to recognize what I order is right. So Hitler isn't saying to them that they have to sentence people to death. He's just mentioning that if they're lenient, then he won't approve of it. And he's suggesting that they have to be as severe as possible to them. So it's up to the judges now to anticipate the will of the Fuhrer, and they gave these death sentences to keep him on board, or keep themselves on board in his eyes. Another thing that happened, the Nazis at the top must have realized that they also could fall victim to their victims. Yesterday's talk about Stahlecker, he died in March of 1942. He was the Soviet resistance partisans got him, and slightly a bit later, Reinhard Heydrich, so pretty high up in the pecking order, he was also assassinated as well. In 1942, it was the year that Roland Freisler, absolutely fanatical Nazi, an ex-communist, he became the head of the People's Court. His idea was to humiliate the people who came in front of him. I've tried watching, well, not tried, I have successfully watched quite a number of things with him in action. Now, I've got this thing, Traitors Before the People's Court. In fact, I've used it in videos, but it's very difficult. So you can because you can hardly hear what the defendant is saying, because the defendants are behaving in a way which is dignified and correct, whereas you've got Freisler shouting at them, and because the quality of the audio is already bad, but with the shouting, it's really it's difficult at times to make out what he's saying, and but the way he just loses his temper, it's as though he's got no control over himself whatsoever, and unfortunately, it's a pity that none of the defendants ever didn't just start shouting back at him as well. Of course, they would have had the microphones turned off, but he might have, because if they're going to get sentenced to death. But I think it's easy enough for me to say that because I'm not on trial. So that. One thing about the People's Court is it wasn't made up of professional judges. So you've got the court chairperson, or chairman, because it was a male. You've got one assessor who was a professional judge. And if there was a 5-person court, then 3 judges could be from the police, Wehrmacht, the party. And these were people who had been picked because of their party loyal and not to their knowledge of the law or to jurisprudence. So, and the judges of the People's Court were appointed at the suggestion of the Reich Minister of Justice, who in turn was appointed by Hitler, and there was no appeals as far as the judgments of the People's Court were permitted. The convicted person had the opportunity to ask for the death penalty not to be carried out in a formalized clemency process, but these appeals were pretty useless from the start. I think there's 1 or 2 cases, though, where the death penalty was waived in favor of life imprisonment. Now, and one thing which is important is this: there's only one judge from the People's Court, Ernst Lautz, who spent any time in prison. Many of these criminals continued in their being judges after the war in West Germany. And I've came across a couple of um, um, cases from East Germany as well. I think that the People's Court, or just the whole legal system as such, was just another arm of the system, which is designed to actually humiliate and terrorize. If you take Russia, what you have today, for example, they put people in cages, even though these people are not likely that they're people who are. It could be old people. It could be people like Mikhail Hodorkovsky, for example. They're not going to. They're treating them as though they're violent and dangerous, but they're doing it for a reason. And the reason they're doing it's a show trial at which they can only be found guilty, and they're doing it to humiliate them. That is the point of what they want. They want them to be humiliated. And so that's what the Nazis didn't come up with putting people in cages. If they thought of that, I'm sure they would have done as well. Right, anyway, so there's my brief presentation, half-hour presentation. I shall have a look now at some of the things you've written here. And so, hello, Mike, Craig, Tosh, Eva, Mohammed, Christoph, and Colin. So Christoph, unsurprisingly, is in favour of the death penalty. I thought he would be, and Colin says the guilt of any offender has to be proven beyond all reasonable doubt for a conviction in the United Kingdom. Yeah, there is a case. For all of you, if you've watched Judge Judy, you will know that there is a difference between a civil court and a criminal court. Okay, we've got the case of O.J. Simpson, although maybe that's an unfair example, but where he was found not guilty in a criminal court and guilty in the civil court, although, well, I think I talked when he died, I talked about the problems with that. I appreciate that in some cases, if you've got enough money to throw at something, it doesn't matter how guilty you are, you'll get off with it, and vice versa. And right, so Tosh pointed out that the Markov poisoning was in 1978. Yes, well, yeah, I remembered where I was at the time. I remember I was still at school, so there. And Tosh says that Roland Freisler was a despicable man who wasn't even human. Hello, David in Israel. And yeah, Colin asks, what happened to the ones who were found guilty but not given the death sentence? Yeah, they ended up in prison. And there are cases when they went to prison and they could be released from prison. And when they got out, they ended up in a concentration camp. The best example I can think of is Niemöller, although in his case, he was actually, when he went to court in 1937, he was found he was found guilty, but because he was sentenced to time served, so he was released. Now he was going out the court. He was picked up by the Gestapo and they took him off to Sachsenhausen, and he spent the next 8 years there. You've got cases like from the White Rose. I did a video on Trautel. And she went in, I think, I can't remember now, 3 prisons she was sent to, and people could go to prison for 6 months and then be released, and then they could sort of return. So that was also possible. There's cases where people are released from concentration camps as well. I mean, in the 1930s, there were lots of people released from concentration camps, and it was during the period of the Second World War. But it was even possible. I can recall seeing documents, for example, finding documents in the archive in Stutthof. I remember one woman, above all, who was released in 1944, and she spent 4 years in Stutthof. And I had the commandant's recommendation. Said, well, and said that her they were considered as being Germans, even though they were Polish, and said that I think it was 2 of her brothers were in the German army, and so they had to release her. So it was possible, but being released was highly unusual. To a second. Scotus. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States. Yeah, okay. Right. So Christoph asked, when did West Germany stop the death penalty? Yeah, the death penalty was stopped in 1949 as part of the Basic Law of West Germany, and so when West Germany made its constitution in 1949, what it wanted to do was to put the past behind it. And the people who drew up the Constitution, this is really important to say, they were mainly people who wanted to put the past behind them. Most of them were victims of the Nazis themselves, people like Carlos Schmitt and others. And they drew up this Constitution to be liberal and to have, into sort of, okay, we don't have anything more to do. That's all behind us, and we want to start afresh. So that's why the East Germany got rid of it. And the last person to be executed was a murderer in I've forgotten the date. It was either 1449. The last person to be executed in West Berlin was in 1950. That was, again, it was a murderer. And in West Berlin, because that wasn't covered by the Basic Law there. Now, in 1951, you had the case of these prisoners, for example, above all, these Einsatzgruppen prisoners who were in Landsberg prison. And one of the arguments that was put forward was this, is that the Americans authorities, which had sentenced them to death, were now the occupying authority, but how could they execute these prisoners on German soil as the death penalty didn't exist? And that was one of the arguments that was put forward to McCloy, the commissioner. So that was awkward, and unfortunately, I do mean this unfortunately in this case, a number of people had their sentences commuted, and then they were out by 1957. One, Martin Sandberger, whom one of the very first people I ever did a video on, he even gave interviews saying how great Hitler was, and all these people were just sentenced to death normally, and it wasn't as bad as all that, and they had to do it, and this type of the absolute denialism. And this is in the 2000s, and so the case of Sandberg, he learned absolutely nothing. I'm going to update my video on Sandberg because I found something. I have an interview I found about 3 years ago, which I've translated, and it's been stuck on my computer ever since. And I'll read this to you. Okay, Murray asks, Alan, what did you learn that was new for you on this research on topic covered by other documentaries? What did you unearth that you found very enlightening for you? Don't know. It's a hard question. I'm often moved by places I go to. I mean, I know this isn't the question, because, for example, when I went to Sternenfels last weekend, that really did have an effect. That had an effect on me. I don't want to say it was very enlightening. One of the things that keeps coming at me is the amount of people who were actually opposed to the National Socialist regime. And when sometimes you come across things of incredible bravery, which is something I feel. Now, just actually, I would like to quote again something new. Something I saw yesterday was a 19-year-old girl in Russia who'd been sentenced to 3 years imprisonment for writing a poem. And to me, this incredible bravery of this young girl, and I could sort of see that in people I've come across through looking at court documents from Nazi Germany. Is most court documents was destroyed. I need to point out there's not that many of them, but the Schurl ones actually survived, and the reason it survived was because they were sent to Berlin, and that's the Munich records were destroyed, So that's how we know about the interrogations, for example, of Sophie Scholl. We've got a record of it. So anyway, sorry, Murray goes on to say, I asked this because your on-the-ground research often takes a different line of research than many historians who do not do such micro research that you often do. Yeah, I think the thing is this, is that you get things stuck in your mind, and it's only afterwards then you start sometimes you might start questioning things to say that, just a minute, that doesn't make any sense. That's illogical. Now, I am totally opposed to conspiracy theories and all the rest of it, but sometimes something happens and you think, well, just that couldn't have been that way. It's wrong. I'm trying to think of one or two things where I've taken a totally different attitude. I'll give you one thing, for example. I mean, this is not very controversial, but when the Americans and the Soviets met up at the first time, if you ask that as a question, when did it happen? Everybody would say it happened at Torgau. It didn't happen at Torgau. It happened at a place called Lorenzkirch, which is approximately 40 kilometers to the south of Torgau. And what happened in Lorenzkirch was the Americans arrived at a place called Strelau. They crossed the river with a great deal of difficulty in an old boat, and then they got to a place where it was covered in corpses. And the reason it was covered in corpses is because there was German civilians had been fleeing from the Soviets, and then the Soviets had bombarded them. And so this was the first meetup between the two. I spoke to a lady there who was a witness to it. And I suspect that she will be the last witness I'll actually come across. So, because these things now 80 years ago, so it's unlikely I'm going to meet more people. But anyway, the commissar who was there, he ordered the Americans to clear off, go back, and we'll meet somewhere else. They met again 3 kilometers away from there. Wonderful area, really nice, lovely place. And there, this time, they were ready. They had the food ready. They'd set up, instead of the Americans having to take half an hour across the Elbe in a rather rickety old boat. They had some lines set up so they could cross, pull themselves in quite easily. And so this is the sort of thing I think is, so that's more like real history. The Soviets couldn't show a place where they had committed a massacre of unarmed German civilians. So they did it somewhere else, another place, which is very attractive. Then they had the meeting in Torgau. Torgau looks the part, so that's why it happened. That's why books continue at Torgau. And when, for example, they had celebrations in East Germany for Elbe Day, it was always at Torgau, but that wasn't the place where they met. I can recall seeing, I took some at the East German Embassy in Paris in 1985. It said about meeting up in East meets West in Torgau. That isn't where it happened. Anyway, I used that as a as an example of things that had to be hidden. Right, Donald Duck, right? I'm not certain it's the real one. Official judge, death penalty in the Third Reich is crazy if there were mass killings in those days. Yeah, I know this sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But they've got to understand there's two different things. The point of having the People's Court, which then you could have the death penalty and then you'd have posters put up, that is to act as a deterrent. That is to show that if you distribute materials in the university which are anti-Nazi, then you will be executed. That is the point. Whereas the mass killings that were taking place, for example, in the Holocaust, that was because of belief in conspiracy theories and things like that. Got to get rid of these Jews because of Jewish secret plots or something like that. That was the reason for that, but that had to be kept secret. That had to be kept secret for that reason. The Nazi also, I mean, they commit massacres where they could burn an entire village down, something like that. Happened in Poland, happened in the occupied Soviet Union, and the reason for that was usually because they didn't want the partisans to come back to these villages. Or I think it could have been also done out of frustration as well, that they couldn't find the partisans, so they killed the civilians and they destroyed their houses. All right, Donald also writes, in native countries, Morocco and Saudi Arabia, still death sentence exists. Yes. Many countries death penalty still exists. Yes, no, and so there's lots of countries. I mean, in the Western world, it's the United States and Japan, and in Japan they've got a very unusual form, is that the person's sentenced to death, but they don't know when this will take place. So unlike the United States, where you say that's it, you're getting executed on the 17th of July or whatever, in Japan it's that every single day. You could be, they don't tell you, and so then you could just open your cell door, so that's it, we're executing you in an hour's time, and do you want something to eat before we kill you, sort of thing. Donald writes further, today's US is close to fascism. Deja vu, 1930s, 1940s Germany. Once companies make policies for own profits in government White House. I think yeah, look, there's some things that have happened in the United States. I personally don't think it's as bad as going towards fascism yet. I mean, there's some really... the problem in the United States is that the person in charge is an economic illiterate, I would say. But whether or not I would say it's going towards fascism... I don't like the direction of travel, but I don't think it's fascism yet. But on the other hand, if you're in the United States, do get on the streets and protest, to make sure it doesn't happen. So Tosh mentions the White Rose. And Murray says, thank you, Alan. I like the answer of your personal emotion to my first question. And my second question, your workers made me want to do more amateur books and video research on the Katyn forest. Okay, yes, Katyn. The person when I first went to Poland, the person I met, I was living in a home where the father was one of the victims of the Katyn massacre, and this was always something that was quite close to me. I can recall the very first book I ever read on this subject, called Death in the Forest. I asked for it in the library, and they went and got it for me, and I read it in 1978, I think it was. There was never any question that it was the Soviets who did it. Never. The one thing I've got a theory, which I can't prove, but I based on circumstantial evidence. And it's the following: is that the Germans knew about this by the autumn of 1942, and the reason I say that is that we have reports of people saying, "Look, there's bodies there," but I mean, there's bodies all over the place. I mean, Stalin had murdered hundreds of thousands of people in two ways: either deliberately allowing them to starve, or by shooting. So there's these places all over the Soviet Union, and so there was the reports there. So the fact that this place near Katyn, near Smolensk, because the Katyn massacre is used as, but they happened all over the place, in Tver, not so far from Moscow, at Kharkiv, and other places. So these killings were all over the place. The one that was found is Katyn, near Smolensk, and so they started burning the bodies at Treblinka, at Belzec and Sobibor in the winter 42-43. In fact, Belzec had stopped killing people, and they kept a crew there to burn the bodies, which started probably in December of 1942. I mean, difficult to dig bodies up when the ground is as hard as it was there. Having said that, there are arguments against this, which I shall also present. They started burning bodies in Helmno in April 42 and in Auschwitz in September 42. So maybe that doesn't make any sense. I think, though, when they announced this in April of 1943, that is when the front is now at a standstill. There was the massive defeat at Stalingrad. There was the counter-attack by Manstein at the Third Battle of Kharkiv, which sort of stabilized the front. There was this attempt between Hitler or the Nazis and the communists to come to some kind of peace agreement. When that broke down, and then they announced the finding of these bodies. It fits in too nicely. And the fact that something fits in nicely doesn't mean to say that it's incorrect that it found down there, but I believe that it was probable that they knew about it. There's also something written in Goebbels' diary which hints at it, and this is the thing. It's this hint, and I'd have to give the exact words, and I can't remember the exact words off the top of my head. Anyway, good. So Daniel says hello, guten Abend all, and Tosh asks, am I going to that forest one day? Shorts was like, no, I can't go to Russia. Not as long as the present regime is there. I'm not going to do it. I think it's too. I hope that Russia will be liberated, but for me to go to Russia in the current situation, no, I'm afraid not. I won't be going there. Cody asks, Cody, sorry, I forget, sorry. Would be curious if you know how the verdicts of the Volksgerichtshof, the People's Courts, were communicated to the Reich Ministry of Justice and decrees returned so quickly. Good question. Don't know the answer to that one. How were the verdicts communicated? Well, I think the question is, if I've understood the question, Cody, you're asking is this: were they communicated via file, which is either courier or post, or were they communicated via phone? Because the normal procedure in these circumstances was to communicate via normal post. So the files would be sent by then. I don't know the answer to that one. Sorry, but that's a good question. I don't know, because they certainly weren't sent by post. If you saw, there's a video I did on the first victims of the Holocaust, which was up last Friday, and in that you've got the complaints because the files have gone missing, allegedly. The files weren't missing. They turned up, and the Gauleiter Wagner put them in a drawer, and he left them there. But the excuse that was used is, well, they weren't sent in a specially marked envelope, so they sort of got lost somewhere, and that delayed it. So, but I think in this case, if you're looking at the People's Court, I think that they were. I think it's likely that it was even telephoned through. There was Cordial further writes, there was a ministerial review and with trials in the morning, execution in the afternoon. It begs the question. Yeah. I mean, in a case like this, that there was the law was entirely in the hands of Freisler. It didn't have to be. It didn't have to go to a higher judge to be looked at further. I think this was the entire point of the People's Court. I think maybe that is the question that you're asking. It's not like a normal court where there could be some oversight and there may have been some right of appeal. In the People's Court, there was no right of appeal whatsoever. That's a good question, though. It's a good question. Well, thanks very much for being here. Tomorrow. Oh, sorry. Okay, another question. It might have been a rubber stamp, but I don't know that for a fact. Was curious. Appreciate it. No, Cody. The point of the People's Court is for quick justice, and justice. Sorry, quick punishment. Okay. Thanks anyway for being here. Tomorrow I've got a video. Now, once more, I shall apologize about something, which is that my I've had the polls to ask people what video they want up, and I put 4 things up. Now I have been started putting up things I hadn't actually finished, but I had written it, but I hadn't finished it, and now I've had 2 winners now, both of which are finished, and I shall prove it by talking about both of them. But I haven't put the videos together, and actually in one I thought I could even do a bit more, but anyway, it'll do. Because of the amount of work I've got to do, from here I've still got stuff on my computer which is in front of me now, which I really want to get finished tonight. So I'm sitting in front of this for the next couple of hours at least, and then when I can't stay awake any longer, I'll go to bed. And bed's just behind me here, so this is the advantage when you're in a motorhome. You can sort of you can do what you want. Everything's really close. I've got my kitchen here. Here's the shower. It's really good. So these other two videos, the one on Skojene and the Wehrmacht and Baben Yar, I haven't done them as videos. So the polls are being postponed for a while, and I'll just have to put up stuff which I've already prepared. So anyway, tomorrow, I've forgotten what it is now. I put something up. Oh yes, I put up a bit of 16th century research I did. The only reason I did this video, it's because I saw something on another channel, and it was absolute nonsense. And it's a video that the other person's video will get 50 times more views than mine will. But they were extremely painful, horrendous, botched execution of Henry VIII's most loyal servant. It's something words to that effect, and it's clearly not true, and it was something for which I didn't know, and then it was just a matter of finding people from the time who described it, which wasn't all that difficult to say that this is all wrong. But this is the point. This is the thing, though, is to go back to original sources. Sometimes it's very difficult to go back to original sources because it's trying to get into people's minds as they were then. That's one thing which is very hard for us to do, and but also to go back to. I always believe if you look at what was said at the time, you can understand why people did things the way they did and why they thought the way they did. Okay, thanks very much for being with me here today, and I don't know what my action. I've got to go to Poland. I've got something quite urgent there. So if I am not on the road somewhere, I'll do a video like this. But if not, there'll be a shorts video that goes up in place. Anyway, thanks for watching. And okay, thank you. Right, so bye for now. Thanks, Cody. Thanks, Donald. Colin, Craig, everybody else. Sorry, Daniel, Christopher, everybody else. So I've said names of people who have commented. I haven't forgotten anyone. If I've forgotten your name, just write it down. Trish, right. Tosh, sorry, not Trish, Tosh. Right, bye.